Ever since I was a child, I've always been inexplicably fascinated by lies. Perhaps because the line that separates telling a story from telling a lie is so subtle to be almost non-existent. And I've always loved watching, reading and writing stories. But this line exists, although sometimes it is difficult to see. After all, if stories are the manifestation of our dreams, then lies are the impossibility of making such dreams a reality. On the other hand, there are situations where it is right and also necessary to lie. Saying that lying is always a morally wrong action will be really too naive. In fact, when we talk about the best way to judge lies, we often don't consider a very important and easily forgettable element that can completely turn the judgment and the perspective of people. That is the intention with which lies are said and thought. But can a good intention still attenuate or even excuse the act of having distorted the truth? This problem seems completely alien to My Hero Academia, but really the answer to this question is complementary to the quality of these great stories of little heroes. Because once this lie is unmasked, My Hero Academia becomes only a shadow of a mediocre battle shonen, but tries to convey a simple, powerful message with such passion and intensity that, for me, it's just impossible to not respect it wholeheartedly, even if I perfectly know that is, and will probably forever remain, nothing but a huge and clumsy lie. Lie that takes the name of Midoriya Izuku. People are not born equal is a strange opening for a battle shonen like My Hero Academia. I mean, it's not funny at all, it's not emotional or blatantly shanic and two-dimensional. It's a sentence that doesn't want to make you dream but to make you think. It's such a pessimistic and cynic but ironically true comment that it seems written just to make fun of you, or maybe of itself, since the premise is to show you an academy full of hopeful and young heroes of justice. But is it really that dark? Because also all the other battle shonen are not just confetti, party trumpets and stupid conets everyone hates. For example, last time I watched One Piece, Caesar Clown kidnapped and drugged children to use them as lab rats and... my god. I really can't understand why Japan think Akamega Hill is kid-friendly. But I can understand why One Piece is kid-friendly. No opponent of Luffy can be considered a real villain, because despite their actions are more than evil, it's difficult to take seriously antagonists so smiley and cartoony that looks like parodies than real, fearsome and despicable pirates. Everyone has an aura of dangerous authority, but they never convey to me a visceral feeling of being in front of someone who finds pure pleasure in killing people, despite many opponents of Luffy are just simple killers who find pure pleasure in killing people, and they'll never convey this feeling until their motives will remain only an excuse to make them less clowny than they really are, nor that's the goal of One Piece. The clash between the ridiculous and the cruel, between tears and laughs, between fun antagonists with no fun intention and stupid protagonists with absolutely stupid intention is the appeal of One Piece, and the reason why Oda created these characters and the world in which they live in this way, not to comment on strong themes even though they exist, but to make Luffy's adventure the most classic hero's journey, a real fight between the good and the evil. Even if the protagonists are pirates and therefore the real villains, but I think you got it. For its first season and a half, My Hero Academia is that kind of experience. It channels the first, carefree but turbulent moment of One Piece with a dignified respect, until we are introduced to Stain, and an already forgotten first sentence begins slyly to return relevant. Stain, and all his figure involves, marks the true beginning of My Hero Academia, and the point where the story acquires a personality and a depth of its own. The tone becomes gloomy and catastrophic. The villains are introduced as villains and are showed like true villains, and the smiles of the first seasons becomes only distant memories. Until chapter 95 of the manga, My Hero Academia becomes a steep and desperate descent to hell, leaving in our protagonist's hand a heroes with a capital H kind of situation, and in our heads the doubt about the uselessness of fighting for a concept as nebulous as peace. Maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but that sense of real danger, that feeling of foolish, heroic desperation, despite the mangaka publicly apologized for the steep change of tone, is just what My Hero Academia needed the most. Not only to distance itself for ease which you can compare it with all the other famous battle shonen, but also because emphasizing the rendered details of some characters is what Koya Horikoshi, the author, does best. People are not born equal is not just a revengeful cry for the cancellation of 2 series in a row, but the inconvenient open secret on which stands the whole plot of My Hero Academia. After all Might is a lie. Deku is determined to destroy his body for his hero and together with his classmates wants to protect a society based on suppression, which silently instigates people to use their quirks illicitly. So proclaiming not only on the first page, but already from the first sentence that you, generic reader or viewer, may not become the pirate king or Hokages in your dreams is a choice that feels almost out of place for a story so cheerful and happy as My Hero Academia. It is a sentence that strikes and leaves its mark. A sentence I would never have expected to read as opening of a story that constantly reminds you how anyone can be a hero. It's a warning you can only understand in retrospect, because at the beginning it's difficult to notice it when you have such cute characters in a world so colorful and flashy that splash energy and vitality even on paper. And only in retrospect, only after you've distanced yourself from the emotion of the first watch and its intelligent trap, you can see how much My Hero Academia is an uncomfortable middle way, the unfortunately necessary step many other battle shonen will use in the future to evolve and distance themselves from a redundant and obsolete past. Because My Hero Academia managed to find its own identity trying to approach shonen, not treating them as such, but at the same time falls into trivial errors its predecessors made their strengths, and in doing so reminded me how much better are its inspiration almost under every aspect. This is a very controversial topic to discuss, but I think it would be useless and counterproductive not to consider it, or pretend it's not so easy to compare a bunch of battle shonen that have much in common. Also because only by putting them shoulder to shoulder you can understand how and why My Hero Academia is in a far more uneasy and complicated position than its predecessors. In 1995, Dragon Ball was still vivid in everyone's mind, and its legacy was picked up and improved by 3 manga that will mark an era. 3 manga today are considered synonymous of the word shonen: One Piece, Naruto, and Bleach. And I don't think I'm exaggerating by saying that. Literally, ask any manga or anime fan what they think hearing the word shonen, and I'm sure the answer will be at least one of these 3 names, depending on their preferences and experiences. And I think this is an overall good thing. Thanks to their worldwide success, more or less anyone knows what manga are, even on a basic level, and you can find them more easily than before. It's exactly this the world where My Hero Academia has managed to carve out a big slice of public, a world in which One Piece is the best-selling manga, and where Naruto and Bleach have ended, but for many they're still alive and remembered with love and nostalgia as part of the famous pillars of Jump. Talking about My Hero Academia means we have to consider a world where there are more manga and anime for everyone, a world where you can become who you want, how you want, but also a saturated world where everything is more complex and where everything is more disgusting because it's complex, a world where everything is uncertain and more stupid, but certainly more convenient and satisfying if you know how to play your cards, a world where if Dragon Ball have never existed, My Hero Academia would have been the new thing to overcome. But we already have Dragon Ball. In fact, we watched it so many times we remember every episode and cliches, and after watching a couple episodes of Super, for me it was too clear that we don't need another Dragon Ball nowadays. But this is still the world where My Hero Academia has managed to do something almost impossible for many others, so it must have done something right. How and why it has succeeded are far more complicated questions than one can think, because despite My Hero Academia has the pacing of a modern title that knows perfectly where it's going and where it wants to end, it completely lacks the creativity, the skill, but above all, the smartness of a modern title. The smartness of an author who should have learned something for thousands of other stories, with thousands of other characters with a problematic past we can use strange powers in interesting and innovative ways, or thousands of fights where the protagonist doesn't win just because it's the protagonist, or thousands of worlds where the society is modified completely by the existence of superpowers, or thousands of secondary characters that are not only figures with superpowers with absolutely nothing super and absolutely nothing interesting, but an integral part of the story, or thousands of stories where the protagonist is both the all-time high and the all-time low of the entire show. People are not born equal is My Hero Academia's soul, body and energy. The entire story and its powerful message are based on this sentence, and it's also thanks to this sentence if we immediately connect with Deku. And precisely because of this, I can only find sadly ironic that this sentence is turned upside down, and thus loses any kind of meaning in just one chapter, thanks to the hands of his so beloved protagonist. Nowadays, it almost seems like that every character wants to be a formidable fighter with a tragic past. In fact, when Deku thinks that Todoroki, his classmates with the ability to create the Ice Empire, would be a perfect protagonist for a comic, I couldn't help but disagree with him, because that would be boring. Or rather, when writers think creating a character full of problems and inner dramas which immediately leads people to make a connection with him, that's boring. In fact, it is the way you show those problems and how they affect the character what separates separates a Bakemonogatari from an Akame ga Kill. And just after seeing the protagonists of Akame ga Kill trying desperately to attract my attention, throwing to myself yet another tragic past, that I realized how much Deku is a pressure protagonist, and probably one of the best in recent years. After all, how many are like Deku? How many protagonists are that shivering child with no powers, who tries to save his friend from overpowered bullies? Few or very few, but for very considerable reasons. The only example I can think of is Tsunayoshi Sawada from Katekyo Itmare Reborn, that... wow, it really doesn't look good anymore. Tsuna is a good-for-nothing mess, the last person you would think as the boss of the mafia itself, but even he is not a protagonist without compromises. He doesn't have to earn the title of boss, even if he has to defeat a couple of enemies to be recognized as such, because he has Vongola's blood in his veins. He is forced to become the boss. Moreover, his clumsiness doesn't add anything new to the plot, if not comic events in the first episodes that, in fact, are the worst of the entire story. The golden rule to follow in these cases is that every element of a plot must exist only to serve its message. If it doesn't, then it's wasting your time. It's clutter, something to rethink or delete. And obviously one of the most crucial elements is the choice of the protagonist, because a wrong point of view can make even the most interesting story dull and boring. One of the most fascinating examples I've ever read about the topic at hand is the Kubiki Recycled, the mystery novel written by Nizio Izin, writer of my beloved Monogatari series. I-chan, in fact, was only a secondary character Nizio Izin later made protagonist after noticing how important he had become in the plot, and it's easy to understand the reason behind this choice. Compared to Kunagisa, the original protagonist, it's him who actively investigates and puts together all the clues at their disposal. It's also always him who has the most interesting interaction with all the other guests of the mansion, not to mention his problems with Kunagisa herself, which makes their intimacy almost embarrassing after discovering it. If using Kunagisa would have flattered the whole story, the same would apply to Todoroki, or any other character other than Deku. I'm sure watching our beloved Shoto dealing with his family problems in first person will be a very enjoyable and personal experience, but at that point we will have a different My Hero Academia, probably a My Hero Academia focused on how to be a hero facing parental abuse? And at that point, what would distinguish his story from Hanekawa's one from the Monogatari series, if not having superheroes' thematic issues and being a bit generic? What makes Hanekawa's conflict interesting is that we don't live it through her eyes, but mainly through Araragi's. Only in Monogatari White, that is the last part of her narrative arc, she becomes the protagonist, and only at that point we can understand the whole picture. Both stories serve the same theme, but in a different way, and with different results and consequences. Furthermore, observing such a personal problem through the understanding of others is intrinsically fascinating, especially if two characters have grown in opposite ways. And this must be what Horikoshi thought when choosing Deku as the protagonist. If the goal of the story is to convey that anyone can be a hero, what is the most interesting point of view? That of a hero who wants to become the greatest hero of all time, or that of a person without powers who wants to become the greatest hero of all time? Obviously the second, because it's a risky choice, and everyone loves risky choices because they lead to interesting, dramatic, dangerous and exciting developments. Ironically, what makes Deku such a special protagonist is precisely that he doesn't have anything special in a world full with special people. It's precisely thanks to his plainness if he can bring something new to the story. A point of view Todoroki or any other superhero can't add if they remain as they are. This is also why their conflict is so engaging to seem almost personal, because it's a clash between two opposite but equally right lifestyles. Both deserves to win, but only one can claim the first place, and I imagine every one of us took a different side according to their personal experiences and beliefs. Deku is a perfect protagonist for this type of story because, like Ippo from Hajime no Ippo, he is nothing and has nothing. Well, except his naive dream of becoming a hero, the ironic lack of not having any quirks, and the ability to lie to himself repeating that he will succeed despite that being impossible. Deku is that kind of liar you cannot dislike because all of us are, have been or know someone like Deku, a dreamer, who from an early age wanted to become an astronaut, a football player or an artist. Just like me. And just like hundreds of thousands of people, I guess. Because it is true that people are not born equal, but we all struggle to make our dreams a reality. This is a theme everyone can relate to. So when not only society but his mother and his favorite hero says that no, He can become a hero despite his commitment, but you still see him running against a villain to save his so-called friend. The trap set by the first sentence is already being triggered, and you are completely involved in the narrative. Already from the first page, if not from the first panel, you don't need to know anything else about Deku, because you know everything you need to understand him and to put yourself in his shoes. In fact, when All Might tells him that he was wrong and instead he can become a hero as he always dreamed, it's very difficult, if not nearly impossible, to hold back the tears and do not start jumping around the room for Deku, despite you know him since 20 minutes ago. Because those words are what we all dream, the proof our time spent in something a lot of people thought trivial was indeed the right thing to do. Like us mere mortals, Deku must earn those words, and the way he earns them is trying something scary, risky and most likely stupid. It's a more reasonable version of gambling. If you start with nothing from a rash act, you can only earn something, be it something material or an inner lesson. Obviously, with that scene, My Hero Academia is not trying to push people to throw away their life at video poker, or to risk it in an eternal search of an heroic moment. The attempted rescue of Bakugo is more of a symbolic act that can be interpreted in infinite variation depending on what you want to see, whether it is to find the courage to ask a girl out or to stand up and face your inner demons. The message the first chapter of My Hero Academia tries to convey is that anyone can make their dreams come true, even if they seem impossible. That with commitment, determination and a lot of discipline you can create the so-called luck with your hands. It's the more anime message ever, a classic wave of optimism only the ingenuity of Japanese entertainment can provide in such a powerful and effective way. But in the second episode, My Hero Academia snatches all that optimism from you and adds a small, tiny little sentence at the end that says, anyone can become a hero, only if you are nearby and All Might ready to give you his superpowers. Deku should never ever have obtained One for All, because at that point he becomes like Todoroki, just another very powerful superhero. No, rather he becomes worse than him, because Todoroki is a very powerful, dramatic and unlucky hero, with problems and traumas to overcome, while Deku is nothing but the most mundane quirk of all. Getting All Might's quirk can be considered the right reward for all his efforts, but this logic doesn't hold up from a narrative standpoint, because now Deku not only supports the message of the story marginally, but moreover the plot doesn't take new risks when he was literally sitting on a gold mine. It's the same discussion on why Todoroki would be a bad protagonist. It's more appealing and original a story of a superhero learning how to control his superpowers fighting fearsome super enemies, or the story of a nobody learning how to fight super enemies without superpowers. On the other hand, I can understand the reason behind this choice. After all, it is the simplest and most effective way to engage the audience in the short term, and this is also what thousands of other authors did in the past, so there must be a reason. But let's be honest, if we don't take risks on narrative, where should we take them? In real life? Don't make me laugh and depress more than I already am. There were more appropriate ways to make Deku stand up to Todoroki or Shigaraki Tomura even without One for All. For example, actually taking advantage of the support team, students who design gadgets to help heroes. And this doesn't seem to me an option so absurd if you think about it, even if that would have made Deku something like the Batman of anime. And as silly as this nickname might sound, this development would have been perfect to reflect the message of the first chapter, would have been appropriate for a character like Deku, and above all, would have made each fight as exciting as the rescue of Bakugo, if not 1,000 times better. Even the entrance exam to the academy would have been one of those scenes you will always end up remembering, given that Deku should have stood up to those big-ass robots concealing his total lack of quirks. And think about fighting a real supervillain! Watching My Hero Academia, the "he's good but can do a lot better" professor constantly told to my parents during high school was never more clear. And if this feeling was conveyed to me by its protagonist, the character who must be the absolute star of the show, then there's a much more serious problem underneath all of this. Because it's not only Deku that could do a lot better. The secondary characters, the quirks, the narrative world, and even the fights themselves seem to be written with enormous naivety, and inserted only because Horikoshi thought they were cool, funny or interesting, but without even exploring any of these elements in their being cool, fun and interesting. It's all plainly plain, as if this was the ground on which he should have built the real My Hero Academia. And if a superhero-based battle shonen limps right on its foundations, like fights and superpowers, well, I would say that I think it's pretty clear, but I just love One Piece. It's one of those 3 stories that made me the person I am now, alongside Toradora and Bakemonogatari. Unlike Toradora and Bakemonogatari, I always found myself returning to it, though my relationship with One Piece is kinda complicated. I hate to be cliffhangered, especially when you could stay on the edge of your seat for month and month. So in One Piece case, I simply decide to wait. And while waiting a week, 10 weeks, or most likely 100 weeks, I always find something new and interesting to watch. And all these new and interesting things to watch make me slowly forget those hundreds of episodes out there ready to be watched comfortably one after the other. But maybe it's better this way. Every time I end up binging the wonderful absurdities Oda manages to pull out of who knows where, I can only let out a huge sigh full of dissatisfaction. Precisely Japanese mobile games kind of dissatisfaction, if you know what I mean. In those type of games, you are overwhelmed by a feeling of pride and accomplishment, completing fast, fun missions full of flashy prizes and easy, free, premium money, until the game takes the role of your mom and decides you have to wait before you can be flooded again by that sweet, sweet shower of simple and childish fun. And waiting is never fun. Maybe that's why a lot of Bethesda's game never worked for me. The magic that triggered my addiction for One Piece are the characters. Precisely, I love their interactions. Goofy expressions, light-hearted talks, combined with some serious discussions, are real pleasant and entertaining to watch. But obviously the best interaction are when these characters get down to business in epic and high-sounding fights, otherwise it wouldn't be a battle shonen. In fact, I think One Piece has the most enjoyable fights I've ever seen in any anime, and also what I consider the perfect archetype of a fight, although this one is neither epic or high-sounding. Luffy vs Usopp is a personal, intimate fight. So personal and intimate, the only correct way to enjoy it is putting your hands over your eyes and simply don't watch it, and also don't hear, so you should mute the sound too, I guess, because nobody wants to see or hear its consequences. After all, having a vague idea of who the true challengers are is all you need to understand that this is just unfair. We know Luffy, it's practically a living legend, a monument impossible to break down without targeting his friends. In fact, he cares so much about them, he often launches himself into stupidly desperate situations just to save them. At this point in the story, he defeated Kuro, Don Krieg, Arlong, Crocodile, Ener, and in the following saga, he will defeat the fearsome Lucy. While who even is Usopp? A liar with a slingshot, some silly gadgets, and 2000 subordinates. Too bad they exist only in his head. This fight doesn't make sense, they are on 2 completely different leagues. There are many reasons why Usopp has nearly 0 chances of winning. He doesn't have the power of a devil fruit, Zoro or Sanji type of resistance or strength, and moreover at that precise plot point he is also so badly injured that a single punch will be enough to defeat him. But Usopp doesn't want to lose the going merry, and the only thing he can do is challenge Luffy, despite knowing perfectly the desperation behind his act. And because he's so desperate that the hamster in his head starts running, and he understands his chances are completely 0. Let's analyze this fight. Usopp will lose 100% if Luffy stays close to him and or hits him first, so Usopp must obtain the first shot to dictate the pacing of the combat, maintaining at the same time an optimal distance to use his slingshot and avoid Luffy's punches. But the slingshot isn't the only weapon in his possession. In fact, Usopp has some dials recovered from Skypiea in the previous narrative arc, among which stands out one able to generate gas and the infamous Impact Dial, a weapon capable of absorbing the force of any blow and to release it, causing serious internal injuries to the enemy if the user can manage his backlash. So the plan is really simple. The only way Usopp can actually hope to defeat Luffy is to channel his strength into the Impact Dial and use it against him. But to do so, he must first make Luffy angry, and this is probably the most difficult part of the plan. After all, they know each other literally from the beginning of the story. Usopp is well aware Luffy will never fight one of his friends with all his strength, especially if wounded like that. So in order to make Luffy fight, he has to play dirty, using the love for his friends as a shield and a weapon. In fact, Usopp gains not only the first shot, but also all the successive shots, succeeding on putting Luffy in some real dangers, using sharp and explosive weapons to harm his rubber body. Too bad Luffy cannot be defeated with so little. It would have been too unrealistic seeing how much challenges he has overcome. So after barely resisting the Dial's backlash, Usopp is defeated with just 1 punch, leaving everyone unsatisfied. After all, there was no scenario in which everyone could have been happy. Whether he won or lost, Usopp would still have left the Straw Hat crew, and losing was the only right choice both for the abysmal difference in power and for exploring and evolving a character who really needed a change. All fights should be like this fight, where the important thing is not so much who is the winner, because we already know who will be the winner, but its development and the consequences the victory will have on the other characters and the world around them. Fights where you can understand the thought process made by both challengers and with that by the writer behind them. And fights where every action of such characters is natural and dictated by their personality. All fights should be like that, and this is not how My Hero Academia's fights are. In fact, if we try to dissect them the same way, it immediately jumps to the eye that something is wrong. But to do this, I have to go into specifics. And I want to do it because a story so loved as My Hero Academia deserves concrete evidences and affirmations. So I hate to stop the flow of this video, but disclaimer! Now I'm going to explain why the fights suck, why the superpowers suck, and also why the society built around the superpowers also sucks, going into details. So if you not have seen My Hero Academia or you do not care about my criticism, then I really suggest to jump directly to the part where I literally lose my mind as I try to understand why I consider it a masterpiece despite all of these problems. So, without further ado, let's get... That's right, let's get physical, like All Might vs Nomu and Deku vs Shisho, Todoroki staying an All Might himself. Unfortunately, or luckily, there is not so much to comment on. Once you see All Might defeating Nomu exceeding his limit, it's like having seen all the most important fights My Hero Academia has to offer you, namely those people usually remember, because they all end with the protagonist who win breaking rules previously set by the story itself. I think the third season is the exemplification of this sentence, but the key example is the fight against Shisho, in which Deku manages to move, although he could not, simply because he didn't want to lose. So what My Hero Academia is suggesting to you in that moment is that all the other hypnotized students couldn't move a finger because they were less determined than Deku? Now I understand why that scene reminded me so much the anime ending of Soul Eater. I always try my best to choose the right words to use because I don't want to sound pretentious, but the fight between Deku and Shisho is simply terrible. It is one of the worst fights I've ever seen, and I say this after finishing Akame ga Kill and Bungo Stray Dogs, who, well, are excellent contenders. Deku couldn't have won, but he had to, otherwise we would never have had the fight against Todoroki, and boy oh boy if people love this fight. And I both understand and don't understand it, because this time it's Deku's behaviors that breaks their rules. I mean, the Deku we see in the first episode, or the one that passes Eraserhead exam, or the one that wins the first race of the festival, thus the Deku that studies quirk as a hobby, would have stayed still and simply destroy his own body without trying nothing new. This does also happen against Shisho, where Deku literally falls into his trap despite knowing more or less his quirk. These are solutions at the limit of the acceptable, because hell, everyone acts without thinking, and I personally know how much you can move despite having broken bones. But if we compare these fights with those in which Deku thinks laterally, moments which Deku acts like Deku, the first seems written by a child. But I don't mean it in a mean way. When you realize how awkwardly they have been structured, the magic that surrounds them vanishes, and what remains under your eyes are literally two action figures slamming against each other, only with special effects and high quality sounds. And this is adorable. It's adorably stupid that reminded me of those nerve-wracking moments when I couldn't lower my arms or Goku wouldn't be able to defeat his enemy. And just like those childish actions, it seems almost unfair to criticize My Hero Academia's fights, because yes, they don't follow any logic, but they are written really with the best of intentions. Unlike classic battle shonens where fights are nothing more than mere clashes between good and evil, here they tell the characters more than the character themselves. After all, when you put your life in danger or you want to get something important, if you want to win or to survive, you have to give both your good 100% as well as your bad 100%. In fact, Nomu shows All Might in all his dramatic, heroic strength. Deku Shisho's disillusionment, Todoroki's family problems, the intimate relationship between Ingenium and Ida, and Bakugo's ideal of heroism. And to make this situation critical and important, you have to make dramatic choices that emphasize the dangerousness of the situation, and therefore choices that create events seemingly impossible to overcome, like making All Might weak, making Deku fall into Shisho's trick, and make him break all his finger against Todoroki. But impossible situations do not require impossible solutions, but laterally creative solutions that make you say, wow, I didn't thought about it, but creating that I didn't thought about it is not easy at all. It requires a lot of effort and skill. Skills I believe Horikoshi hasn't mastered yet. The ingenuity of My Hero Academia's fighting is basically why his two previous manga have been cancelled. Manga where magic is used magically only to quickly end an interesting premise, but told in an uninteresting way, and where the so-called lance that will save the world looks more like the branch that will save the world. Except that, for My Hero Academia's case, I wouldn't talk so much about ingenuity as clumsiness, because every fight has a better ending right under their noses. Nomu was created to resist to only one All Might, but true, if Deku had struck Nomu with all his strength alongside All Might, Nomu's defeat would have made much more sense. Moreover, that combined attack would have given Todoroki more reasons to suspect their connection. As for their fight, well, 10 fingers equal 10 opportunities. Instead of wasting them for no reason, Deku could have fought Todoroki aware of that limitation, and therefore, for example, could have exploited the airspace. Use a finger to fly in the sky, 2 or 3 to dodge the opponent's probable blows, and the last one to launch yourself straight over him to hit him with your whole fist. Or he could have directly shot himself like a cannonball if we want something less anime style. While regarding the fights against Shisho, Deku must win, so the only solution is rewrite Shisho's power entirely. An example could be to specify that Shisho can force people to do only what he tells them to do, so Deku would have been forced only to walk, not to move his arm or to speak, but also in this case, if a bump is really enough to get out his mind control, then Shisho would have acted accordingly, and therefore would have forced Deku to walk without moving his arms, without speaking, and the fight against Shisho is simply terrible. It's just badly written, but not badly thought. The intention was really good. The entire tournament, as stated by Horikoshi himself, was more an excuse to tell Todoroki's backstory than an opportunity for the characters to show their quirks, but it's still based on Deku's determination to show the world what he has. In fact, the tournament starts showing the ability of all the participants, and they're showing exactly the opposite. Choosing Shisho as his opponent was the only right choice to remind Deku how, inside, he was still that unlucky kid who looked with sparkling eyes his favorite superhero, hoping for a miracle he knew would never have happened. Also, taking away the lack of superpowers, these are the same feelings at the base of his fight against Todoroki. After all, people are not born equal because your quirk, its usefulness and spectacularity, define who you are, who you will be, how you will be seen by others and where you will go, exactly like social status in our world. In fact, Shisho is in the ordinary class because the academy's tests reward the most physical and practical skills, rather than mental and psychological ones. And Todoroki didn't have to do any kind of examination simply because he was Endeavor's son, superhero second only to All Might. Everything revolves around quirks in My Hero Academia, so it's obvious the root of its problems is how Horikoshi decided to manage them in a world where 80% of the population has superpowers. In fact, Deku loses all its uniqueness because he acquires a uniqueness. Society is unrealistic because everyone are unrealistic, and fights are mediocre because quirks are mediocre. If the fight between Shisho and Deku tell us something about their characters on a personal level, the two quirks don't tell us anything because they don't create anything new, they don't synergize or anything else between each other. So the only way Horikoshi had to continue the story as he had planned was to indeed to break the rules. The same problems occurs again in the fight against Stain, but in a different form. In fact, here no rule is broken, and the result is a fight that, although not bad, is simple but flat. Stain's quirk can paralyze opponents drinking even a drop of their blood for a limited time depending on their blood group. It's an ability perfect for assassinations, that are indeed Stain's specialty, but it doesn't affect in any way the outcome of physical fights against multiple enemies, because narrative time is relative. If the author wants to spend 5 minutes between 2 pages to increase the pacing, he can do so without almost any repercussion. In fact, the fight is limited to a simple exchange of punches and kicks, also thanks to how Horikoshi managed the 3 little heroes' powers. I mean, Ida can only land fast or faster kicks, while Deku only punches that don't even break him anymore. The only one who could have tried something new was Todoroki, but all he does is using this power exactly as he did during the festival. And the result of all this are characters with great potential, but with powers strangled by absurd limitations that make fighting interesting only on paper. But interesting is a sly word to use. It says a lot of things and nothing at the same time. So let's take a step back and try to understand what it means to give superpowers to a character. Generally, it means increasing normal human abilities to extreme, or choosing certain characteristics of objects, animals, or natural elements and making them an integral part of the character. In both cases, the character can manipulate this power within the limit of his body or outside of his body. Luffy, for example, is made of rubber, and as such can stretch or shrink at will, and is resistant to blunt attacks and electricity. On the other hand, Luffy cannot control rubber objects, cannot create it or make other objects of rubber, while there are not so many characters that can only manipulate the environment. The only one that comes to mind at the moment is S-Death from Akame ga Kill. In fact, his power allows her to create ice from nothing and to manipulate it at will, as far as to freeze space and time for a few seconds. That hey is cool as hell. And usually there are not so many characters like this because the ability to manipulate the environment is often combined with the ability to manipulate your own body, because the limits of those characters are only the creativity of its author. In fact, you can understand how My Hero Academia's quirks aren't fun by confronting them with their counterparts from other stories. It's probably stupid to compare Todoroki and Aokiji, but I think this example can perfectly underline my point. Aokiji can freeze using his body or the ice he creates, he can make his own body of ice, manipulate ice, and in the context of One Piece, it's impossible for him to drown, while Todoroki can only freeze on contact and create ice. Of course, Todoroki uses his quirks so brutally and one-dimensionally because this is part of his character arc. But despite being an interesting characterization, it's not interesting to watch. Also, isn't he curious to find out how far can he push himself? Because hey, if I had any kind of superpower, experimenting would be the first thing I would do, especially if it's an obscure power. Strange and creative powers mean nothing if they're not used in a strange and creative way. At that point, they become only uncomfortable things that exist. And the only way to show them a little is to use them in a very circumscribed situation. In fact, Zero's cellophane is actively used only to help Bakugo in the second phase of the tournament, and not to dodge Todoroki's eyes. Koda defeats present Mike only because he happens to be afraid of insects, and Nagakura's invisibility came handy only when she had to secretly handcuff the professor. Although Rikoshi repeats every single time how much he wants to show all characters' quirk, he effectively discards every single opportunity. The best example is the last part of the festival, the so loved tournament arc, that, well, I really struggle to think it as a real tournament arc, when the all important fights are those with the main characters we all know and love, while the others show up for 5 minutes total. And I think I know why. Because their powers cannot be interpreted creatively. They are two-dimensional and therefore only huge gimmicks. Why limit Zero to launch cellophane only from the elbows and not from his whole body, allowing him also to modify it at will? Or why Agakure cannot become invisible on command or make only parts of his body or what she touches invisible? And why Koda is in Class A, when in Class B there is a girl who can manipulate plants, a guy who can copy quirks, and one can solidify the fucking air? Usually, writers limit superpowers because they don't want to make them too powerful, and therefore unbalanced. But it is not always necessary. In fact, if you make all characters overpowered, nobody is more powerful than the other, as long as you don't meet the wrong character with the wrong power. For example, in the Skypiea narrative arc, the Straw Hat crew meets Enner, a character who is considered god, thanks to the Rombo Devil's Fruit power, that allows him to create, control, and to be made of electricity with all that comes with it. He's such a strong character that Luffy managed to defeat him just because he's made of rubber, but that doesn't mean the fight is one-sided and that Luffy wins without problems. In fact, Enner does everything to defeat him and almost succeeds. After all, electricity causes heat, and heat melts rubber. As ironic as it may seem, you do not limit a character to make it weaker, but to make it unique. This type of character becomes the star of any story if used well, because to make it relevant, you will have to make it fight against strong opponents and exploit its power limit laterally. And My Hero Academia has a character that follows this philosophy to the letter. And his name is... Endeavor? Yes. Endeavor, a character who has a total of 10 minutes of showtime, is the best example of how a superhero can only create fire. In episode 17, he increases his temperature, throws a fireball, makes his boots so hot to melt concrete and climb a building, creates a fire spear, and uses flames as some kind of jetpack to land. It's fucking great! An Endeavor would really be my main example if that scene was not anime original. It didn't come out the mind of our poor Orikoshi like the 5 minutes of fights between secondary characters characters during the festival, and the delightful filler episode on Tsuyu. Bakugo is the best character of My Hero Academia, because he takes full advantage of his power in a fun and interesting way despite its limitations. In fact, I think the best fight in all My Hero Academia is the exam against All Might, because there's everything in it. It carries on the relationship between Deku and Bakugo, it tells us why Bakugo wanted to become a hero and what it means to him to be one. While talking about the fight itself, there's also the right dose of strategy and heroism. The fight between Bakugo and Todoroki is also really great. After all, it flashes out Todoroki's insecurity, and Bakugo performs a new spectacular move in all its foolishness. In all the fights that have been shown in the 2 seasons, Bakugo is always in constant movement and always tries something new, and this is exactly what every secondary character should do. Don't show all of their cards, but suggest to you that they can do a lot of other things. I would expect everything from Bakugo but nothing from the others. And I don't want to complain for what we got, but thinking about a Bakugo that can blow up sweat from any part of his body or even remotely really gives me the chills. Bakugo also perfectly represents the other side of the coin, thus how much superheroes can change a person. He went from an arrogant kid to an awful bully, and when he loses for the first time and witnesses what others can do, he goes nuts, because he never found anyone able to stand up to him. So if he really wants to become the best, he has to radically change his approach, and that means evolution, and evolution leads to character arc and depth. And all of this is good shit. But under this aspect, Bakugo is not the only one, fortunately. Todoroki's trauma and therefore his personality is linked to the power of his father, and in fact his evolution circles around him accepting it. For Ida it's a bond with his brother, for Ochako a limitation she wants to overcome, and for Deku a way to believe more in himself. Too bad only main characters quirk tell a story, while the others remain completely anonymous. But quirks do not only affect the people who have them, but also everything that's around them. And if 80% of the population owns them, then it's obvious those quirks will end up influencing and transforming the whole society, right? Right? Well, no, apparently. I knew rewatching Tiger and Bunny would have ended up being a good idea. Well, I was hoping it would have ended up being a good idea, because rewatching Tiger and Bunny after the second season of My Hero Academia was a pain in the ass. It was a pain in the ass adapting to the slow pacing, to secondary character without charisma, to fights without bite and personality, but it wasn't a pain in the ass looking at the city where those fights took place. Sternville City took heroes and turned them into idols, models and real pop icons, and printed some nice stickers over their beautiful costumes, because hey, saving people is important, but never as much as thanking the sponsor who made those beautiful costumes available in the first place. Tiger and Bunny really knows how to make you appreciate a reinterpretation of New York in a 1978 where superheroes are rarities among rarities, because the charm is all in how it looks and in the way it tells itself. In fact, superheroes have not only shaped society and its culture, but also the whole city. Sternville City looks like the mechanism of a complex golden machine, and at the center of this wonderful machine there's the Justice Tower, hub and gym for all heroes. And you live the city intimately through the turbulent relationship of Tiger, an old-fashioned superhero who cannot keep up with the times, and Barnaby, a newbie with a tragic past, more interested in becoming the best superhero instead of saving people. Tiger and Bunny's city is bright, attractive but cynical to the bone. It's a city where every action of the heroes has a score that determines who is the most loved by the people and who can continue to work. Because in Sternville City, even being a hero has become a precarious job if you do not give the public the adrenaline, the drama and the action they want, or if you destroy public properties just to save a civilian. My Hero Academia and Tiger and Bunny are two profoundly different anime. One uses fights to tell stories, while in the other they are more of a necessary not so good obligation. After all, superheroes should do super things, otherwise why choosing a superhero theme in the first place? But if on one side Tiger and Bunny struggles to keep you awake, but recovers itself thanks to a great complicity between the protagonists and a well-written mystery in a world that looks like a small golden nugget, more My Hero Academia introduced new heroes, more in my head I wondered why everything was so normally normal. I mean, there's Mount Lady who can become a giant, Kamui Woods who can control his body made of wood, Backdraft that can generate and control water, and… wait a second? Backdraft can generate water? But this can only mean one thing. Backdraft saved the fucking world! Being able to generate water at will, no mouth or field will remain dry, but after quenching all those thirsts and making all those deserts flourish, these poor people will need a house, a bed, a bathroom, furniture. But there is no problem because… Cementos and Yuzuru save the world again! Being able to manipulate concrete at will, building houses, apartments, and entire skyscrapers will be a breeze, and Yuzuru will create all the materials necessary to the completion of the houses. The only problem would remain the electricity. But guess what? Kaminari, Endeavor, and Todoroki saved the world. Again, for the third time. Yeah. I think I made my point pretty clear. And I think it's a point I made pretty clear only because My Hero Academia stresses that quirks are transmitted from parents to children. So who knows how many Backdraft, Cementos, Yuzuru and Endeavor just exist in the world. Those who could save the world are superheroes, while that 20% of people without powers who knows what they do. And those that cannot save the world, what do they do? Or what do they can't even do? I'm really sorry to pick on COD again, but come on, his power is totally useless. The only place he could really be considered a hero is inside a disinfestation company, and the only enemy could ever hope to defeat is a colony of cockroaches. The more I think about it, the more I find absurd how Horikoshi didn't think better about the implication of the powers. I mean, in this case, the gags write themselves. Mineta can produce sticky balls thing from his head, so putting him inside a glue company seems the most reasonable choice for me. Maybe a company where the owner chose him to discover the secret behind his stickiness, so he ends up trapping him. But of course at the end Mineta not only manages to escape, but also unmask the evil owner thanks to fortuitous randomness, appearing like a true hero. My Hero Academia needs this kind of stories. They would give depth to a world and characters unfortunately really flat. In fact, I really enjoyed the filler episode on Tsuyu. It's so well developed that I wanted one of these for every Deku's classmates, because not only it actually shows you how superpowers are used in different situations, giving the topic its space, but at the same time emphasizes how you can still be a hero for someone else without All Might's power. It also suggests that the only real obstacle to becoming a hero is, well, you. A message that, if you think about it, is precisely the implication of that famous first sentence. That pessimistic people are not born equal takes a different nuance when combined with the last you can become a hero. It implies a sweet and less brutal reality, but no less it is reality if you think about it. Because of course we are all born different, but nothing prevents anyone from finding a way to make their dream come true. Being born in a different place with different rules and different cultures involves making a different path compared to others. A path more difficult and certainly more painful, but in the end the prize is always there, even if you fail or throw the towel. Or at least I hope so. I genuinely don't know, and I think no one knows that. Because the prize could be something different from what you wanted, perhaps even something unpleasant. But is not this the important thing anyway? Having a good intention, committing to it and doing the best despite results is not in itself a prize. I think no, because we always want everything. After all, why take a slice when you can take the whole cake? But I'm too young to say these made up sentences looking all cool and wise. Unfortunately, this good intention is also the lie of My Hero Academia. I mean, how can you tell a story where anyone can become a hero if you then give to the protagonist the world? It sure works for a chapter, because the first is a short story with a proper ending, but for a long story like My Hero Academia, this doesn't feel right. But there are ways. In fact, there are so many ways and so many solutions you can say there are infinite ways and infinite solutions, and that's what I love about narrative. Maybe it is exactly giving one for all to Deku that Horikoshi wanted to convey that message, or it's simply too early to judge. Manga, like TV series and anime, are a strange and sly way to tell a story, because time passes from one chapter or episode to another, and time, along with the judgment and interest of people, has the power to radically change the quality of the plot. In fact, all my criticism could disappear already from chapter 96, and I couldn't know it because I stopped at 95, and this will result in me looking like a complete idiot, criticizing something people think will be false and stupid when the inevitable second half of the third season will air, or the ending recontextualize everything, giving magically depth to the whole story. And unfortunately, or fortunately, this isn't so unlikely. The ending is the most important and difficult part of any story, because if you know where you want to go and how to do it, you will leave viewers or readers a good last impression, despite a horribly boring development. On the other hand, we don't have a magic crystal ball that can look into the future, and talking using conditional is the most boring way to end any review, analysis or writing thing. People who read this written content are not interesting to know what will happen in the future, or how much the product will be worth in 1, 10 or 1,000 years, but if it makes sense to consume that product now in its current imperfection. In fact, I think that reviewing or critically writing about video games has become more difficult today than ever before. The trend in recent years seems to be the so-called video games as a service. Video games that aim to be daily hobbies adding seasonally new content. But also video games the AAA industry interpreted as the best way to pluck a lot of chicken selling an early access at full price. How do you review a video game that now has nothing but in a year will be full of things to do? How do you approach it and with what ethics? I believe the only correct answer is to understand how effective that content is in keeping you entertained and for how long it succeeds. If you have to wait a year before that content actually becomes fun, and to get that fun you have to drop some nice big bucks, then it makes no sense, because you can use that time and money to play something entertaining now. So, the question about My Hero Academia becomes, even if it's incomplete, even if the fights don't follow any logic, even if the quirks are exploited not so creatively, even if the secondary characters are huge gimmicks badly used, even if society is unrealistic and underdeveloped, even if My Hero Academia has all these imperfections, is it worth watching? And my answer is a dry yes that brings with it a sea of controversy. I mean, I spent like 7 pages explaining what doesn't work and then I go out with a simple yes? My fear in saying this is to look like one of those reviews where the gameplay sucks, the story sucks, the graphics sucks, or everything else sucks, but the little number down there is a great 8.5 that doesn't make sense. I hate those reviews. They are anything but clear, they and their confused message. I often wonder if those reviewers are not confused themselves, because here I was the confused one. I kept My Hero Academia as an insurance if I would ended up not liking Bungo Stray Dogs and Mega Kill. If they had disappointed me, at least I would have had a delicious dessert to cheer me up. My Hero Academia has been a terrific dessert until a couple of days have passed, and a thrilling memory has turned into a vivid and disappointing reality. Disappointing. Yes, very disappointing, because everything that did not make me appreciate Bungo Stray Dogs and Mega Kill was also present in My Hero Academia. So I was ready to end this video saying yes, My Hero Academia tries to convey a powerful message, failing, but in this discussion there's a big but that isn't Mount Lady's butt, but the butt of hundreds of thousands of people, including mine apparently. Otherwise, I wouldn't have spent months and much of my sanity to put these endless streams of consciousness together to answer a stupid question that, hey, you have been warned would have been complex to answer. But, although My Hero Academia is full of flaws, people love it. I love it, and I won't be the only one who has seen so many problems in it. Probably I'm the last asshole. But saying that I love it seems a bit exaggerated. Let's say that when I saw the announcement of the 3rd season of the movie, I was really happy. Not as I would be for the announcement of another Nizio Oasis light novel adaptation, but I was still very happy because I know perfectly well how My Hero Academia doesn't waste your time. And this sentence, in all its simplicity, must mean something very important. I wouldn't rewatch the fights in Bungo Stray Dogs and Mega Kill for any reasons in the world, while My Hero Academia's ones get me excited despite being behind this stupid shit for 3 months. And I would lie if I say that Deku didn't convey to me that message full of determined heroism, despite being a living lie. I understood why all of this only reading the first true page of the manga. Well, it would be more correct saying that I remembered reading the first true page of the manga. When you want to talk critically about anything, I think anyone spontaneously tries to detach emotionally from what they have in front of them, but I believe this creates the most anonymous criticism. I could spend hours on end telling how much the new Monster Hunter is what the series needed the most, or how weapons are easy and fun to use but hard to learn, but that would be boring. I'm probably redundant because how many people already talked about it. But if that speech would tie what the series mean to me, how Monster Hunter 3 made me meet some of the best people I've ever met, and the thrill of meeting up with the same people to defeat the final boss and the recent Kulve Tarot, I think it would come out something much more special and interesting, because we often forget it, but we are people, and people empathize with other people, even if they exist only in books, video games or anime. And I am a person who, unfortunately, always tends to empathize a lot, even if I don't think I show it properly. So yes, disclaimer, reading how much Horikoshi just wanted to write a story he liked, especially after discovering his two cancelled series and the depression they caused him, biased me. If I hadn't read those handful of words, I would have concluded this video saying that My Hero Academia is not worth a watch. and in doing so I would have been wrong. I also would have been a fool, because that's a simple answer that serves only to avoid answering the real question. And thinking about it in retrospect, I think the motivation of that thought was essentially a misunderstanding. Let me explain. Practically all my friends have seen My Hero Academia, and when we discussed together, they did not stop saying how exciting and spectacular were the fights. But that's not true. It isn't the fighting that's exciting and spectacular, but it's everything around the fighting that makes it look as such. And it would be really stupid to keep talking now without taking into consideration the huge elephant in the room. You say Run, but also Jet Set Run, I Can Become a Hero, Hero 8, Trinity, Bombing King, Kimi no Chikara, Anguish of the Kirkless, My Hero, Just Another Hero, and I could go on until the last track are My Hero Academia. Without this soundtrack, everything seems wrong. Fuck, reading the manga with the music seemed wrong, as if I was missing a fundamental piece of the experience. And the most absurd thing is that when Deku runs to save Bakugo, You Say Run started playing in my head by itself, just like I Can Become a Hero at the end of the first chapter. The soundtrack is so representative of the story, the characters, the drawing and the message that watching an episode without it should be illegal. In fact, this big elephant for many only takes the name of You Say Run, or their favorite track, but for me it's called Yuki Ayashi. He loved dancing before realizing that, generally, music is not composed to be danceable, so he started creating his own music, trying to channel in each of his soundtracks the very essence of movement, using instruments that emulate this fluidity, instruments that build the sound, such as violins, trumpets, or voices, while electric guitars, pianos, or electronic sounds are used as accompaniments to amplify the feeling the soundtrack wants to convey. In Bombing King, the drums represent Bakugo's explosions because he stands out for its frenzy. Instead, the guitar has a rough sound to underline his anger. Or in Kimi no Chikara, the piano emphasizes Todoroki's sadness, accompanying and accentuating a melancholy epic voice. But soundtracks that convey vitality and movement have to be supported by drawings and a pacing that exalt and embody this delirious musical quality. And exactly the lethargic pacing is what I consider the weak point of One Piece. Because when the story introduces the enemy and the main objective, in your head you already cannot wait to jump immediately to the next new adventure. But in One Piece, a narrative arc can last even 100 chapters, and very often those 100 chapters seem to stretch out the story a little too much. While in My Hero Academia, a chapter seems to end almost too quickly. A fight generally lasts for a couple of episodes, and this involves narrative arc where you have to emphasize the quotes, because they end in a dozen episodes. The story jumps from one new thing to another as if it's afraid of becoming boring. Too bad the word boring doesn't exist in My Hero Academia's dictionary. The pacing is so enthusiastically fluid, it seems natural to watch it all in one breath, despite some episodes of pure, quiet time could only do good things. But quiet time isn't what Horikoshi draws best. He's able to convey a real sense of impact, both physical and emotional, drawing perfectly positioned lines to enhance characters' expression, and therefore their feelings, in their most crucial fights and discussion as in the most mundane situations. Depending on the character, a smile can emphasize a frightened courage as a terrifying determination. While talking about fights, they give a sense of urgency and expectation, turning a simple fist into a blaze of pure exaltation, because those expectations are maintained and surpassed. This is why I consider the anime way better than the manga under almost every aspect, because it's natural to see those fists animated and those dialogues dubbed. But I suggest everyone who's interested to take a look at the manga, because seeing those moments of paper does as the author thought them, it's totally another experience. In this regard, my favorite scene is undoubtedly when All Might tells Deku that he can become a hero at the end of the first chapter. Looking at the page, you can feel the clutch to Deku's stomach. His relief in those tears is almost palpable, and the way those words so simple to say but so difficult to realize is visible under your eyes. In fact, it's so visible that the strength of that sentence distorts all the drawing, making the last panel look like some sort of strange avant-garde painting. The tight pacing, drawing that screams charisma, and beautiful characters impossible not to relate to, all combining fights that tell stories. And these stories are embraced and framed by soundtracks synonymous of movement, action, sacrifice, and hope. And in those moments, all problems disappear. You do not care that Deku throws away his uniqueness in the second chapter. You do not care about how much the secondary characters are worthless, about the flat world and those as exciting as in simple fights. No, you do not give a fuck. Because in those moments, despite the hopes and dreams of characters are colliding right under your eyes, there is nothing in the scene but a stunning silence. And in that silence there is only you your dreams, your hopes, and the characters as a mean to convey those hopes and those dreams, and when you realize it, it's already too late, and the music forcefully breaks the shell of silence and literally explodes in a fanfare. Oh! A good soundtrack is always a silent protagonist, and as such, it's not intrusive. It follows the scenes and amplifies their intensity. It's you then that makes them annoying when you listen to a bunch of tracks until they become indigestible, because they are synonymous, if not real substitutions, of all the good qualities the story can offer you, and in addition, they summarize those best moments in a handful of minutes. If the soundtrack of the Monogatari series evokes dreamlike atmospheres, My Hero Academia's soundtrack are heroic moments liquefied and modeled into musical notes, and therefore they are also perfect to represent the crucial moments of a sport anime, like Haikyuu or Welcome to the Ballroom. But before ending this enormous review, analysis, or what the fuck this thing is, we still need to talk about a last small argument. An argument that, although it might seem insignificant, is what allows the manga to attract and fascinate so many people without needing soundtracks or special effects. Because I have spent 15 pages now talking about heroes here and heroic action there, but actually, what does that word mean? What makes a hero such and how a hero should be? Not like Okabe apparently. In fact, in my Steins Gate video I say that Okabe Rintaro, the protagonist, is the hero of the story, though he doesn't look like one. And this sentence is very interesting if you think about it. When I think about the word hero, the first thing that pops in my mind is Superman, despite I've never read his comics or seen his movies. But I know he can fly, he has superhuman strength, can shoot laser beam from his eyes, and can also perform surgery? In short, reading his name and a couple of his skills is enough to understand that Superman was created in this way to be the pinnacle of human being in mind and body. But having incredible strength or being the most intelligent guy in the universe are not essential a requirement to be a hero. Otherwise, All Might and his ingenuity or Okabe and his physique would not be considered true heroes despite being heroes. What these three different characters have in common is the willingness to accept the pain of others and make it their own, called spirit of sacrifice. After all, pain, in whatever form it is the worst thing that can happen to us, and it's something everyone is afraid of. And the spirit of sacrifice is everywhere in My Hero Academia. It is at the same time its binder and foundation. In fact, it's only by sacrificing himself to save Bakugo in what seems a desperate act that All Might remembers what it means to be a hero, and it is thanks to that spirit of sacrifice that Deku succeeds in entering the academy, and probably will be through sacrifice that Deku will become the new symbol of peace. These are the most successful moments of My Hero Academia, those that will continue forever to excite people and why it will always be worth watching. Because seeing any flickering kid trying to do the impossible, both with superpowers or without, brings out an innate adventurous spirit in people that has always been an integral part of human beings. But even if Deku still manages to convey this message acquiring superpowers, I really can't bring myself to like it, because I hate the word luck and what it means. I hate with all myself when someone is actually doing something extraordinary and his response to your wonder is, "It was just luck." And I hate even more when the hero of a story comes up with, "I saved the world putting my life and that of others at risk, but I'm not a hero." Because it almost seems like that we, as a society, are afflicted by such an inferiority complex that no one wants to be responsible even for their own victories and to recognize their abilities even with fictional characters and fake situations. And that's nonsense! Saying that everything revolves around luck makes anything unreachable and unattainable, even in reality nothing is. Otherwise there would be only two people that are astronauts, football player or artists. Obviously this is much more complex than that, as it's for everything, but what I want to say is that the message of My Hero Academia is really precious in our society, because it shows how much the heroes we love and respect were, and still are, nothing but simple people, and therefore, as such, many times they are just huge lies. In fact, All Might, the protector of the world, is a lie, and even the second in charge, Endeavor, is such a monstrous lie to frighten even the monsters themselves. And despite peace itself is a lie, you will never see any of the characters hesitate a second, stop training for a second, or don't want to get better for a second, because everyone wants to make those lies a reality. They prove more than any other character that people are not born heroes, but they become such. That each of us, while not having anything special, can do something special for others, and that there is always a prize for those who never give up. Again, I don't really know how true this is, but even if it does end up being a huge lie, I want to believe it. Because trivializing heroism, throwing it down from its golden unattainable pedestal, means making it accessible to everyone, and this will push more people to become heroes they and others need. It's a virtuous cycle in which I see absolutely nothing wrong. I think this is the reason why I love anime, manga, or in general Japanese narrative, because it channels the desire to dream and to do better than any other type of narrative. And this is very sad to say, because this is probably caused by the extreme oppressiveness of Japanese society, but My Hero Academia for me is a masterpiece precisely because it manages to convey this simple message. Because I've never read a story ready to destroy their characters, their fights, and even their own rules just to show a generic reader or viewer that doing their best, never giving up, anyone can make their dreams a reality. And this genuine, positive naivety is the most beautiful gift an author can make to his audience. Loving My Hero Academia for what it is means making a lot of compromises, means putting a lot of asterisks and a lot of but anywhere. But you know what? I genuinely cannot wait to immerse myself and be deceived again by this mediocre but wonderful, heroic lie. Oh, hey, if you listen to this till the end or just a minute or a second, well, I guess you are the real hero. By the way, I think I have to clarify something, because I'm not sure I was the most thorough in this. I tried, obviously. In fact, it was on the script for like 2 months, 3 months. I wrote and rewrote it who knows how many times, because I really enjoyed My Hero Academia and I wanted to talk about it in depth. I wanted to celebrate My Hero Academia for what it is, and the first draft ended with a total of 22 pages. And that was too much. So I cut things, a lot of things, and maybe I cut important things. But now I can't judge it quote unquote objectively, because I just want to put it out. Maybe I will judge it differently 1 month or 2 from now. But now, in this precise moment, I really feel the need to clarify a bunch of things. So here we go. The One Piece thing. I did not rewatch One Piece. I would have liked to, but you know, 900 episodes are a lot of episodes to watch. So I said that One Piece has the most enjoyable fights I've ever seen, without thinking that One Piece itself has a lot of fights that are just like My Hero Academia's. The one between Usopp and Luffy is an excellent exception. And I probably said that also because I'm really fond of One Piece, being my first anime and stuff. So my criticism about the fights is also true for One Piece. But my point is, One Piece started in 1995, My Hero Academia in 2014 I think. And we know Horikoshi took inspiration from One Piece, and Naruto too. But I've never watched a lot of Naruto, but I clearly remember the fights like the one between Gaara and Lee. So why did Horikoshi try something new? He only took the spectacular parts of the fights, and so we end up having really flat fights. Also thanks to the superpowers, but I've already said that in the video, so I hope I've clarified this point. Moving on! My Hero Academia's message. I think I've really hammered that point to the ground. Maybe I repeat people are not born equal a little too much, and that made me anxious of having read too much into My Hero Academia. But here's the thing, I've read both Omagizo and Barrage, and both share the core of My Hero Academia in some way. The protagonist of Omagizo can't do anything, she is clumsy and causes a lot of troubles. But she loves animals, and the story ends showing you how much doing something she loved helped her in believing more in herself, just like Deku in the first chapter of My Hero Academia. And the same goes for Barrage. The protagonist helps orphans because he's one of them, and then, when the king mistakes him for his son and acquires a great power, he uses that influence to help those in need. He becomes literally the symbol of peace. So yeah, I really think Horikoshi wants to share that message. And finally, the music. I listened to the whole My Hero Academia soundtrack again, and I want to underline how the best tracks are those that you never thought you ever listened. Like, Obstacle Course is an explosion of energy, or We Are Fucking Superstars, that, yes, that's the name of the track. Looks like it came out of Danganronpa, or Sento Kunren, predecessor's sworn friend, and Damn Cowardly School, and listen to all of them, really. They are all incredible. So yeah, thanks for listening and watching this video that is probably incorrect about a bunch of other things. And we'll see next time, maybe with a script about Bakemonogatari or Kizumonogatari. I really haven't decided yet.